Hello, everyone, and we are again back with another episode of the Global Empathy Circle on the mentoring and soft skills at Wiki. As you all know, for those of you who have been following this series on Global Empathy Circle, Sunday evening India time 6:30 p.m. is when we all sisters from across the world and literally from across the world gather together and we pick up one topic to talk about. One moderator, one person, one hostess who talks about it and who runs it through all the rest of us. And we discuss, we dissect, and we look at this topic and how we can be of any help with any small wisdom, insight, experience, or idea about that one topic. And with that, our hope is that for all of you who's going to watch us, you would find a little bit of resonance, you would find a little bit of light from your life to cross ours. And together we would be stronger, we would be greater than the sum of our parts. I am Shinjini Sengupta. I am the National President of Wiki Mentoring and Soft Skills. I'm also the founder of Lighthouse, where I teach programs in storytelling, change making, and creative leadership. And I believe that with stories, with creativity, and with a soft steps towards our self-actualization process, we can get a great deal done. So towards that journey, in that small step towards our self-actual core, today we present to you the topic that we all, perhaps across the globe, as sisters, share a bit of bittersweet relationship with: assertiveness. How important is it to know how to say no? How critical is it in our life, in our everyday small decisions, as well as in the big steps, big things, big life decisions, big life events that we take or do not take in our lives? How does assertiveness roll, shape, mold, and color our lives? Today, to talk about exactly this topic, we have Siobhan Peters from Manchester, UK. Siobhan is a very wise, very practical, and very dear person, and her practicality in her wisdom and insights are remarkable. Oftentimes, when I have spoken to her in the past, I actually, after our conversation, think back of the very weight and the gravity of her advice and her suggestion that comes across as something very lucid, but often has a depth of wisdom and experience behind it. So without spending any more time and without taking up any more of the screen time, I hand this over to the person who would be your guide for today, Siobhan Peters, with the power of assertiveness. Over to you, Siobhan.
Thank you, Shinjini. Good morning, ladies, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. I know for Celia it's much later than it is for most of the rest of us. Before we go on, and I'm hoping that this is something that people that are watching can do as well. So the very first thing, if you take a piece of paper and you write on the top of it, I know it's sort of like mirrors on the thing, and you put assertiveness and today's date. And once you've done that really, really quickly, without giving it too much thought, without thinking about it, without pondering on it, think if you were to give today how you rate your assertiveness skills, rating between 1 and 10, just write that number on that piece of paper. Okay, once you've done that, you can, throughout the conversation, you can share that number if you want to, but you absolutely don't have to share that number. So what you need to do is fold that piece of paper up and put it somewhere that you will come across it in the next few months. So whether that's in your desk drawer, in your purse, in your handbag, somewhere where you will either come across it or you'll remember where it is. And on those days when you're kind of thinking, I don't feel very assertive today, or something happened where I didn't really speak up for myself, I wasn't clear and I wasn't concise, go back, open it up, have a look what your number was, see where you would rate yourself today. Or on some days when you think, do you know what, I was absolutely, today I said what I wanted, I was confident, there was clarity, I was in control of what I said, go back and have a look and see how you can rate yourselves against that number. Because sometimes it does us it does us the power of good in our assertiveness to go back and to look back and to reflect and to say, you know, on that day, without thinking about it, that was my number. That's where I felt that I was. So where can I be in the future? So I'm going to stick mine in my desk drawer now so that I kind of come across it. And when I'm having those good days or those bad days, I can refer back to that and I can think where I was. And I just reference then, and one of the things that we do when I'm teaching particularly young people about assertiveness is like about the 3 C's, so about confidence, clarity and control. So if you're confident, you're composed, you believe in what you're saying, you've got some clarity, your message is clear and understood, and you're in control of the situation and you're in control of what you're saying. So I think it's about thinking about those sort of like 3 C's. So before we go around the ladies, there's just one more thing that I want you to do. And again, take a piece of paper without thinking about it. What does the word assertiveness mean to you? This can be one word, no more than a sentence. It's not war and peace. It's not like a whole sort of like paragraph. But what does it mean to you? Other than, and I'm going to ban this word, bossy. Because I hate it when people say assertiveness is bossiness, and generally people say that in relation to women much more than they say that in relation to men. Assertiveness is not being bossy. So to you, what does the word assertiveness mean? So when you've done it, I'm going to count back in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I've got mine, I've done my word. So when we get to 1, can you hold up your word or your little sentence, whatever it means? So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, right. So mine says, I'm going to go around. So Celia says speaking up. Sinjini says no means no. Being courageous. I can't read, Ray, because you're too far away from the screen and my eyesight's not that good. Can you? Assertiveness is my control in my tenacious attitude within and with love. Plus love, and being able to stand up for yourself and stand up in your
truth.
Right, okay.
So I've stand up for standing for truth.
Thank you. I've got connecting, because for me that's what assertiveness is about. It's about how you connect to the world. So it's how you connect, what's good for you, what's right for you, what stands up for your values, your self-respect, and what's the right thing for you in self-care. But it does that in a way that connects with another person, that is respectful, that isn't hurting, that isn't hurtful, is kind, and say something in a way that they want to kind of, in a way that people don't take any offence from what you're saying. And I think there's a real imbalance in how people see assertiveness. So just in terms of thinking about your word, thinking about what it is, I'm going to go around and I'm going to ask people if you can give me an example of when you feel like you've been assertive and you felt, you know, that worked for you, and also an example where you feel like, do you know what, I really wasn't, I didn't come out of that. And when I say with what you want, it's with what's right for you, and what makes you feel good, what makes you feel well, what makes you feel that you can manage something. So it's not about what you want as in being manipulative and getting your own way. So a time, and it can be your work life, your personal life, whichever. So when were you assertive and you felt that you kind of did it right? And when were you not assertive, and when did things not go so well for you? So I'm going to go to, because I'm going around my screen, I'm going to go to Ratna first. Morning, Ratna. Good afternoon.
Good morning, good afternoon, Siobhan. My word was courageous. So when have I had to be assertive? I have to be assertive in my job, but I like what you said, Siobhan. It's about connecting. It's absolutely about connecting with people and different levels of connection. Why did I put the word courageous? Because the job that I work in, the places that I take people to, it's about coming out of my comfort zone, challenging the status quo, and making them believe in something that they don't want to believe in. But assertiveness absolutely comes into it because you are actually expanding other people's ways of thinking. But what comes along with that is, I think you said it already, it's about your values. can I stay true to what I believe in and the values I believe in? And most of the time, I've done a really good job, because my job is to change culture. It's going really well. I think you said in a few sessions before as well, it looks really good on the front when you're doing it, but underneath, you're paddling. Your feet are going 10 to the dozen, and you're going, oh my gosh, I don't know how people are going to take it, how they're not going to take it, but how you appear to people, how I talk to people. I try to always be open-minded. I try to be humble, because I think in being humble with your assertiveness means that you are also willing to learn with them. But language is absolutely important. And I think as a female, when you say, well, I think that's a good idea, or I feel that this is a good idea. Over the years, I've got more confidence in going, that's a really great idea, and we should definitely do this. You see the change in language a little bit. I feel, I think, it's not assertive enough. And if I said it like that, people wouldn't follow me. But then, to be fair, they'd actually like that more than me saying, well, I don't think this. So it's that subtlety in how you use your language, your body language, that you say that assertiveness with. So you don't have to be in somebody's face. And you know what? Sometimes if you are in somebody else's face, it's the assertiveness is not actually about you. It's actually about the other person and what buttons you're pressing in that person, where they're going, oh my gosh, I don't like this. I like my comfort zone, and she's taking me out of my comfort zone as well. So it's about being courageous. But I think, you know, you mature with your assertiveness as you get older, and the situations and the people you meet. And I've noticed that I've become more solidified in how I can be assertive, but assertive with taking people with you. However, I think you said, you know, when have you been challenged about being assertive as well? It can happen at work, it can happen at home. And many times you're not assertive about situations because there are people who actually have louder voices than you. There are people in the world who will press that button that you don't want being pressed. And the challenge is how do I get to a place of, can I be more courageous? And you have to dig deep. You really have to dig deep from there. I think in a work environment, for me personally, it's been much easier to do that. Please don't misunderstand me. I've had challenges. I haven't got to where I have because of everything being perfect whatsoever. There's times in my career where I've had a knockback, where you think you've got that job, and you're like, should I really tell them what I think? Or is it actually better not to say anything, because there's assertiveness in silence as well?
Yeah, I think I hear what you're saying, and I think when you said about being, I think people see a lot of the time when I talk to people about assertiveness, they think it's about being loud, they think it's about being aggressive, and it isn't. It's actually being about, you know, I like that when you said that, about being sort of like quite humble. And also when you were talking about the language, one of the words that I've stopped using over the years is just, because that you are justifying when you say the word just. So rather than say, I just want to say, I want to say. And I think it is that little, because that word just allows people in, allows people to say, oh, maybe she didn't mean, or maybe she was justifying it. And I think it's really important. I think you bang on there, that it's important about the language that we use. Thank you, Ratna. I'm going to go to Rekha, who I know will definitely have something to say about how important the language we use is, given your background, Rekha.
Afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Siobhan and Ratna, for that. Yeah, I think when we think of assertiveness, it's very much a lot of key points that Ratna's made. It's the point in our journeys that we're at, because if you think about when we were younger, I think about when I was younger, I was always told, oh no, you shouldn't speak up too much because that's too, you know, and I was thinking, but I've been brought up to speak my mind. I wasn't rude, I don't understand, and it was justified by that position of, I suppose, geography of life. I think for assertiveness, for me, language is key. So when we use the word try, there's no definitive end. It doesn't demonstrate confidence at all. I don't use the word try. It's only ever if and when. What you're telling the other person is, regardless of whether you're saying it really loudly or calmly, you demonstrate that it's a definitive. So when you are able to get that report together, I understand it's a challenge. Please let me know. I've had to do that with staff. I've had to do that with peers, seniors, who, when you think about assertiveness in the work sense, power and power imbalances play a massive role in this. And it is about where you feel you are on that sort of seesaw, and it shifts and relationships shift. I think assertiveness is an organic thing. It's something that in certain arenas we're much more rigid and confident because we know the parameters that we're testing the waters. When it's something new, that person doesn't know you. So I always believe that as a leader, one of my things that I've learned is my assertiveness is being very clear from day one. So I've been very clear when I started this role. I spoke to my staff and I spoke to all the managers, and I said to them, what is it that you would like in your job? Where do you want to be? And are you interested in my job? Because my job is to help you develop. And I'm being assertive enough to let you know that my bottom is only keeping the throne warm. It is not mine. It is yours for the taking. If it's not your journey, that's fine too. And so setting parameters is a great way of showing assertiveness, particularly when you work in sort of challenging environments. I always use the term 90-10 rule. Even with staff that are new, I'll say, listen, one thing about me is I'll always give you 90% of the information, but there'll be always 10% that I can't give you for safeguarding, legal reasons, confidentiality. And to build mutual respect, I believe, is true assertiveness, because when they need to challenge, there's an understanding. Where there's a need to celebrate and be joyful, there's an understanding, and boundaries in those relationships allow you to be assertive when necessary. And for example, when I've had to do, say, a restructure or something like that, they've always known, we know Reiki rules. You might not like what you're going to say, but we know you'll be straight, because it is a difficult thing to do. So those are practical things. But I think assertiveness for me is ultimately, as a female leader, you're role modeling. You know, what mistakes have you made along the way? How have you learned them? And what would you do to benefit yourself and be able to impart that knowledge on others? So as a mother of a daughter, I'm very aware of how that impacts how I behave. So assertiveness is not just the interaction, but the gift that we may give to others. And you know, it's really good that you asked where we weren't assertive. And the first thing that came to my mind was my emotional relationships, where I feel that the core value within me is so much more painful. I will bend my assertiveness because I know for a fact I wouldn't in another situation. And I've learned over the years that it's okay to care for people in work. It's okay to love your team members. It's okay to use those words. And I've had to be assertive in organisations to say, it's not a sign of weakness to say that I have respect and mutual care and love for a human being, whether that be a member of my staff or somebody that we serve. It's just, those are my values. And that assertiveness has been uncomfortable for others. And then that's the learning that needs to take place. But I think in all of that, whether that's a firm voice, a loud voice, a quiet voice, it has to be done with some love and care. And for me, if people don't believe that you have that, then I need to get that right before I can even think about my assertiveness, because it just doesn't work. Well, it certainly doesn't for me and from my experiences of work. So I think people think of assertiveness often as a job interview. Oh, be assertive. Ask them, ask them this and ask them that, or negotiating your salary. Be assertive, because it's a fundamental smart target. I want more money, give it me. But really, assertiveness is about that organic emotional thrust that you have with others in different environments. And whatever I believe, whatever I have to do, whether that be a good, bad, or a different message, it has to come from a place of genuine love and care, because I'm not out to spend my day hurting anyone. However, the assertiveness may create uncomfort, pain and hurt for someone because of the scenario, but it doesn't mean I have to fuel it with that unhealthy emotion. That's not my style of assertiveness. So I would sort of encapsulate it that way.
Thank you, Rika. Yeah, no, I think it's really important what you say about mutual respect, because particularly when there is that sort of like power imbalance, because I think people feel like assertiveness is fine if you're the leader, and assertiveness is not fine if you're not the leader. And I think it's and like you say, it's that modeling, isn't that modeling to say, no, this is how we are, this is our culture, this is how we kind of like how we roll, if you like, and that comes from what you were saying there at the end about being authentic, being your authentic self, and that's people won't necessarily like the message, but they will respect the way in which the message is given. And I think that's the kind of most important thing, really. And I like what you said, as a mother of a daughter, I think it's really important for us to role model that, you know, for the next generation of women. Thank you, Rika. Susan, I'm going to come to you next, because you're sort of like next on the screen. Do you want to talk to, you know, about kind of like where you think you are assertive, where you think that, you know, that'd be something that might be an area of development for you?
Thank you. Yeah, this is a really interesting one. I kind of realised, and have I really looked at this before? I probably haven't. And just from those two simple questions that you've asked, I very much can separate it into work and home life. And at work, I realized I'm really assertive. I very much will, you know, there was a few years back, I was in a leadership role, and it was, you had and I now realize it's a position of power as well, really helps. If you're confident in what you're doing, you had a position of power. We had to implement lots of changes, lots of new technology, lots of training. And the assertiveness that was required was kind of easy. It flowed. I had the confidence behind me. It wasn't even a question. And it was the power of experience. Was I like that at work 20 years ago when I qualified? No. But the power of time, the power of experience, the power of my position, it was a very easy. Didn't even really have to think about it. Didn't, you know, people would listen. It's great. It's fine. I knew what it was, what we need to do. Where I really struggled, probably is getting better, is, and the massive one for me is being assertive. So say it was probably when I was in my 20s, early 20s, being assertive with my parents when it came to relationships. Massive struggle. And it's the power of today in this conversation, I realize it's the position of power. At that point, I didn't have a position of power. There was a lot of fear. Did I have confidence? No. And I had fear because of the consequences if these people weren't going to accept my decision of what would then happen. So all of that meant when I was talking about it with my parents, it was intensely bad from an assertiveness point of view, if that is even a right sentence, if I'm completely honest. And throughout the years, I've been forced from the universe to practice that again and again with them. And I would even say, you know, sometimes even now in my 40s, that it can still be challenging. But now the difference is there is more confidence. There is way less fear, because the consequences, I know that regardless of your opinion, I will be absolutely fine. And I'm not reliant on them for anything anymore. So the position of power has changed. But that, I would say, is amazing how there was another thing I was thinking as well, is the consequence of them not accepting what you say at work. It's not even here or there. Like, you know, I'm this much time with you and I'm off. But at home, it was way more influential. So that probably had a massive deal to do with it as well. So really chalk and cheese. And thank you for pointing that out, because it actually has made me realize how much I have developed just through experience and that kind of stuff. But also the chalk and cheese of our different aspects of our life.
Thank you, Susan. I think there is as well, when you talk about work and you talk about the consequence, we know what the consequence is, because in work we have procedures and policies and ways of doing things. So if someone doesn't do something, there is a consequence, because we know exactly what that is. We know what the parameters of that are, and we know what the consequence will be. We know there are HR routes. We know there are all those sort of things that are available to us. But in our personal life, we don't necessarily know what the consequence is. And I think that for me, I shouldn't speak for the people, for me, but like the biggest fear is that there'll be like a withdrawal of love, and that's our biggest fear. And I think it goes back to what Reika was saying, that if something is given to you in love, even though you might not like it, it's given to you in love, and people kind of like recognise that, don't they? But I absolutely hear what you're saying, because I think it is so much easier in work terms to practice being assertive than it is in your personal life.
I think from our culture, I was very much drummed in from very young that you will only be loved if you marry who we say.
Yeah.
And that I knew the consequence, if I'm completely honest. And that came true. They did withdraw love. And and that's where the position of facing your fear now has come from, that I know that I can live with it if that was ever to happen again. So it's a real tough one. And that fear can rise so deep within you. To try and be assertive against that takes every single ounce of courage that you ever have. And it's awful when you look back at it and think that is even possible to happen to somebody.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and I really
great lessons.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing that, Susan, because I think it is that thing, isn't it? It's like it's the fear of withdrawal of love, and the fear of like having no one else to rely on but ourselves, when actually we're all right. We're quite good at being ourselves. We're quite good at who we are, you know, and life shaped us, and life got us to be who we are now. And some of those things, you're quite right, you probably can't do those things in your 20s because you haven't the life experience, and you haven't that kind of that understanding that actually, yeah, I will be fine. I will be able to stand on my own. It's not the greatest, and if I'd have written my own story, I would have written a different ending to this. But I'm not in control of other people's stories around me, and I think it's what you can control.
And in your early 20s, you are still living with them. Where I was, you know, you haven't got anywhere to live. You're kind of they're influencing you on so many levels. They have that control. But yeah, interesting, amazing, developing yourselves. But I wish I had the knowledge now that I do have now. Then I had that.
Yeah.
Right, live and learn.
Celia, I'm going to go to you in Australia. Celia, good evening. I think it's late evening where you are.
It's very late evening.
Getting on for
Thank you.
Do you want to talk to us about kind of like when you feel assertive or when you don't feel assertive, and whether they kind of like echo things that we've already talked about, or whether your experience is quite different?
Okay, I'll go more to the real life experience, because it's a bit more relevant. Well, not a bit more, it's just relevant to the journey of life and how we change and adapt over time. I was a much quieter, kind of shy child, but did like the limelight in some ways as well, but didn't have the confidence to speak up. So when you got us to write on a piece of paper what was the word, the speak up was assertiveness to me, as in the ability to even put a feeling or a need across to have someone willingly listen and respond. My experience was not always that was received and responded, so then I didn't have this sense of assertiveness. I tended to step back. What I found fascinating over the years, once I had my children, that changed. Having children changed something in me where I was able to speak up in an assertive manner in protection of them, even if I couldn't do it for myself. And so what I learned about that was that even as I was being assertive to the school system or situations in the neighbourhood that were coming, and some conflict and things that came by our kids playing with others, was I noticed myself speaking up for my children or putting their needs across and trying to get that really concise return and listening and response, was that I was also speaking up for my inner child, the little girl that never could and wasn't listened to. So every now and then I would notice that I would be maybe even over assertive in the practice of that. And so I actually found children taught me to be more assertive and to have the right, instead of being trained when you're younger, that those subconscious thoughts and belief systems that we're often fed is everyone is in authority, you need to defer to, they're always right. Well, we see a global impact right through the media of why sometimes we should not give our power over to somebody in authority, because sometimes they misuse that. And by dealing with the children on often a weekly basis, different events, especially as they got into teen years, I would still find myself speaking up for myself, witnessing and remember my own mother doing the same, and she didn't always speak up for herself, but she could very well for us, and myself practicing that assertiveness. Now, like Susan said, sometimes your life is in two different parts. Now, I could protect my kids and speak up to them really, really well. That's that protective mechanism. When it comes to relationship, I'm very fortunate I had a relationship where neither of us liked confrontation. So we would back away from asserting either one's idea about what would want to be said and done. Yet even in that, you can have issues because either one is not speaking up about a need that might be really deep and intrinsic into them, and then withdrawing and holding on and perhaps building resentment and creating a story in your mind of what was really going on, rather than speaking it out honestly, getting it on the table and feeling safe enough to do that. So in private life then, I would find that I had not been practicing the same element of assertiveness, even though anyone from the outside and even my partner would more than likely say I'm very assertive, but he's not in here. He's not living the world in here of how much is suppressed and how much isn't spoken, it's thought or felt. And of course, as the years have gone on, I've noticed that I'm getting good at that. I'm working more and more on those subconscious belief systems and programs that have been put in place by parents and society, and finding it's becoming easier and gentler rather than a bark in that throwing out the assertiveness. It's a firm but calm way of speaking, and it's more centered and more balanced. And that's the difference. Society thinks assertiveness is very bossy and pushing out, just like you mentioned, when you can have very quiet, aligned assertiveness. It's like a self-assurance and self-knowing that what you are saying in this right here, right now, is how you feel or a need that needs to be met. And it's coming into a place of not a push and not a pull. It's just more a calm space. Now, when I find myself jumping into perhaps a defensive assertiveness, then I usually pull myself back and go, well, hang on, whose story is this? Who created this story? Is this mine to even jump in and be involved in? Or is that somebody else's just to own their own decision? Do they speak up on a subject? So often we'll find ourselves with girlfriends or family members where the assertiveness can jump in incorrectly when it's actually not your role to even do a protective, assertive type of action. So that's where I will use these words in self-counsel all the time. Okay, you're having this feeling, you're having this emotion. Whose story is it? Is it your right and your role to be involved? If it is, then usually just asking that question immediately brings it from the reactive mind into just quiet center to present in a more calm, aligned way.
Yeah, I think what you said there at the beginning was really interesting. I think it's when you were saying about what I was hearing there was being valued enough to feel that you had the right to be assertive. And I think it's that, you know, that kind of feeling that, like, who am I to say what my needs are above anyone else's? And I think the thing for me about assertiveness is you're not saying them above anyone else's. You're just saying them. They're what your needs are and what you want from that situation. You're not placing them above or below anybody else's. You're just saying what they are. And I think so often, particularly as young girls, we are kind of conditioned into our needs are below other people's, and therefore we place them ourselves. No one needs to tell us that too many times, because it's already in there for us, isn't it, that our needs are there below other people's. So you don't need to kind of like voice that. And I thought what you were saying about sort of like being a parent was really interesting in it, and that reactive sort of like voice as well. I always used to do that thing, you know, when your kids come home from school and they go, somebody picked on them this morning in the playground, and I can literally, you know, you can literally feel yourself as a parent, like your hair's about to set on fire because someone picked on your kid. And I say to them, and I always used to say to them, and I had to learn this, and I used to say to my children, are you telling me this because you want me to know it, or are you telling me this because you want me to do something about it? Because oftentimes, while I'm in that reactive moment of like thinking, right, I'm going to go and tell that kid's mum, I'm going to tell that teacher, I'm going to do this. The end of the story is that my kids had made up with the kid at the lunchtime, had a really lovely time, and they're best friends. But so it's that kind of like, and they're just telling you, because it's just a story of a thing that happened today. And I think it is that I always try and remember that when people are saying things to me, it's like, are you telling me this because you want me to know it? It's just information. Or are you telling me this because you want me to support you and to do something about it? I think that's like a really valid point, isn't it? It's like that, whose story is this? Who am I being reactive when actually it's not even warranted? You know, and I think it is that thing. And the other thing that you said about sort of like being over assertive, I think that's kind of like, for me, it's like that overachieving is a trauma response, isn't it? It's that kind of going back to, there is something that makes us want to overdo something, and it's that voice of, I think you were really sort of like honest there about like the voice of that little girl who was like, no, I'm going to speak up now, I learned that. And also that you could see that was kind of learned behaviour from your mum, because your mum was in the same situation, probably even worse if you're talking generationally, sort of like back in time, it was even less acceptable for women to be able to speak up. So I think, you know, that was like a little short sort of like history of Celia's assertiveness journey, but there was like so much in that along the way for all of us, really. Thank you, Celia. And Jeannie, I'm going to go to you. You're the last on my screen, so I'm going to come to you now. Can you talk to us about sort of like times when you've felt, you know, your assertiveness or not, and how that's affected how you've grown?
Thank you, Shobhan, and thank you for coming to me last, because I got to hear everybody's story first. I am deciding between where to start, but as you were talking about your children, and as Celia spoke about becoming a mother and how that changed her assertiveness game, I'm very tempted to tell you one little story from my own motherhood journey. So this was actually the very first day of my daughter's school, and she was 2 years and 6 months old. So first day at her play group. She comes home. We all, as eager parents on first day of school, we are bunched up at the bus stop waiting for her to come down from the bus. And she comes down with her, obviously, face in snot and colors. And I'm like, what happened? And did you cry? And she says, yes. So then I say, so what did the teacher say? And she says, she told me, don't cry. And then I asked, what happened after that? She said, I said, yes, cry. And then I cried some more. She said, yes, cry. And then she cried some more. And as funny as this sounds, as a mother, it has been perhaps one of those lines that I have repeated the most number of times. So highest on frequency, that it's okay to cry and it's okay to be sad. And I feel that assertiveness, while it is very often construed as something that we do in interpersonal, that permission inside and that permission to be sad, to cry, and to remember your assertiveness even when you are vulnerable. Like, yes, cry, and then cry some more. I wish I had that. And I am happy that I have the wisdom now to be able to pass that on, whatever little thing, to my daughter. Another thing that stood out for me from most of the stories each one of you shared was that for most of you, the assertiveness curve seemed like it went from somewhere down upwards. And I don't know if I should be ashamed to share this or whether I should be happy or whatever it is. I think my assertiveness curve has been much of a zigzag. Why I say that is because as a child, I was the protagonist in my house. And I belong to a joint family. I was the only daughter. And for a longest time before my brother was born, I was the only child, with my uncles and aunts who were younger than my father and unmarried and working. And every day they would come back home. If they would not carry something, whatever small, for me, at the door, I would stop them and I would ask them, what have you got today? So I was spoiled until I had my brother and then my cousin brothers, and all of them are boys. So till today, and obviously I can say that with safety that is permanent, given the age of my previous generation, I'm the only daughter in the family. So with that, my initial years of having a voice, I did not know the word assertiveness back then, but having a voice and also participating in conversations like arguing over politics with my uncles who are older than my father. Like, we were actually a larger family in the neighborhood. For a longest time, I did not know what is bloodline, because all the houses in the neighborhood was family. And I had that access, and even in my home, the gender dynamics was such that, it was perhaps a little better than most other places I see, where my mom and my uncles and aunties, they would all play cards and they would take turns to make tea. At times, I'm not saying that my home was holier than anybody else's, but overall, I feel that I grew up with a lot of access and voice, and I never felt unheard. I did obviously have my, share of childhood hurt and, the inner child wound, but at least the voice was never a problem. The first time it took a hit was when I got married, and I became the younger daughter-in-law in a family which was very different. And it took me many years to say that this is my boundary, because for the longest time, I took what was given to me as granted, and I did not know how to build up when it is taken away from you. So it was given to me at birth, and I took it as my birthright. And I realized it was not my core strength, it was a privilege. And when that privilege was taken away, it took me years to get that back. I am unable to also differentiate between my private life and my professional life when it comes to assertiveness, because I carried over that lack of voice every time I was thrown in a different situation. In India, as many of you know, we speak different language in different states. And me coming out of my hometown for the first time, going somewhere else where everybody speaks a mother tongue that I do not speak, and which is male dominated, given my academics or performance, whatever, I was almost throughout my career at a place where most of my colleagues at the same level were much older by age and male, and taking each other by the shoulders while going out for tea or coffee or a puff, and not being included. I do think that did take a hit on my confidence, on my assertiveness, especially when I was pregnant. That is a journey that changed me, because till then I still would compensate for all those gaps with my performance. But around the time when I was going through my pregnancy, and at one point I was actually hospitalized directly from work. So the treatment at work was, I can safely say, without being biased, very unfair and unkind. I understand their perspective, that they are what they saw, but back then, as a young girl pregnant, I was in a situation where assertiveness was not the answer, because I had a lot of things to lose. I was invested and I needed it more than they needed me. And I remember some conversations even were of the category of, so how long do you need to take meal breaks? And I say 15 minutes. And my boss says, can you make it 5? Can you make it 10? And how many times do you need to take loo breaks? And I'm like, I am pregnant. I'm 8 months pregnant. I have gestational diabetes. I need to eat. And the very fact that male, I can speak for India, but I suspect it is also not so country specific. There may be degrees to it, but just the lack of awareness makes people insensitive. As much as I may try to blame them, but they are bringing to office the home packed lunch which has been fresh made in the morning. So, whatever it is, my assertiveness took hit many times through my adult journey, and I lost that privilege I was given at birth because I did not have to earn it. I got it back much later in life. I also concur very closely with what Celia says, because when I just got my voice back, when I suddenly got that confidence in me to turn around and say, wait, this is not working, and here are my boundaries. One, people started to sometimes listen to me, sometimes not listen to me, sometimes get very surprised, because what I was essentially doing is resetting expectations in very old relationships. It's never easy, because once you have set the expectations, it's very difficult to reset expectations. But also you see that people come around. However, having done that, I now stand in a place where I have stopped playing to win the small battles. So I'm like, okay, fine. If you won't do it, I will do it. It's fine. I mean, now I consciously choose between spending my emotional energy and retaining my inner peace. So I'm constantly actively choosing between what can I do now? While I have set expectations that I am nobody else's than mine and I'm foremost mine, at the same time, I at times give leeway to my assertiveness, because I feel it's okay. I mean, fine, if they're not ready, let me do it. Let me just solve the problems, smaller problems, because I have larger problems to solve. I cannot get stuck in this mud. So, which is something that happens a lot. And people get very surprised that I did this because I'm expecting her to come back to me on that. And I'm like, my best love and wishes and light for you. And I say that with a lot of conviction. It's not that I'm trying to fake it. I say that because my problem isn't that one girl. My problem isn't that one man. My problem is bigger. And that problem, a part of that problem is I want to fight for the right and the path to be soft. Where women won't be told, this is how you have to be assertive with the men. Where men would learn to listen. And this is also not woman, man. It is also feminine, masculine. It is also about just being soft and being tender and see the value in being soft and listen to the unheard and the unspoken. So I at times try to actively choose between winning the small games and to just be right and kind and let people learn from my behavior rather than my words. So a very complicated answer. I hope, Siobhan, I have done justice to your question.
I think it goes back to what we were saying in the beginning. In a lot of ways, assertiveness is a kindness. It's a kindness to yourself. It's a kindness to others, because you're saying exactly what you feel, aren't you? And you're not saying it with any intention to hurt. You're not saying it with any intention to manipulate. That's a statement. I think you raised a really important point in there as well, Sanjini, about the sort of like medicalization of women's bodies, if you like, in terms of, I come from a healthcare background, and I see that an awful lot, particularly around things like pregnancy and sort of like things around menopause and things like that and a lot of the time that's a very male dominated medical world, and it really draws on us to be assertive about our own bodies at a time when we probably feel our least assertive and are least able to stand up for ourselves. And I think it is a really important point, which kind of goes on to when you were saying about, like having sort of like assertiveness as a privilege, and then being in a situation where you didn't have that, and you're saying your journey's kind of zigzaggy. I sometimes feel like my assertive journey is one line. It's just everybody else goes above. My assertiveness has been my assertiveness. I'm a bit like Reka. I was told from being little that I had way too much to say, that I had way too much like opinion. I had way too much, you're too outspoken. And there's a quote that I love from, and she was a women's rights leader in America in the 70s, and her husband was turned down for a job because she was too outspoken. And she said, why did they think I was too outspoken? I'm the right amount of spoken. I'm the same amount of spoken as any man. And that always kind of like, it's that thing of like, so I kind of feel like I've always, you know, and Rose knows me as little, I've always been like this. It's just how people accept that. And I think there is a kind of, in certain situations, like you say, when you became a daughter-in-law, that wasn't accepted, that level of assertiveness. So I think we do get better at assertiveness with, you know, with confidence and with time, but we are almost who we are. And sometimes we have to work on assertiveness more in certain situations. And it's kind of like funny, isn't it, that everybody on this conversation has said around how where we feel we're not as assertive as in our personal relationships rather than in our work relationships. And you know, I don't have any answers for that. I think it's about love, and it's about power, and it's about dynamics, isn't it? And it's about who people are to us, and an inherent thing about respecting people who are older than you, and people have positions in families and things like that. So I think it's a much more, for me, assertiveness is a much easier world to navigate in the workplace than it is in your own sort of like personal life. And I think, you know, Reka said sometimes that's fine, sometimes we have to bend, and that's fine. You know, and it took me a long time to realise that's all right, because for a long time I felt like I was letting my assertive self down by bending, because I wasn't being assertive in every situation that I could be. And it goes back to what you just said then, Sinji, pick your battles, small battles. Sometimes it doesn't really matter, does it? Sometimes it's inconsequential, so now's not your time, is it? So I think, you know, it's that kind of picking your battle. One of the things that we've sort of like discussed today is how sort of like assertiveness can be a very personal thing. It's very personal to you, and how you manage that and how you feel that. The last thing that I kind of want to say is that it's about you. It's about you having self-care and tending your own self and being kind to your own self. And the one thing that we can never, ever, ever control in all of that is how that lands with the other person. So going back to what Reka said, as long as you're saying it from a place of kindness, from a place of love and a place of authenticity, then you've done the right thing, haven't you? And other people sometimes have to manage your assertiveness, and that's about their journey and about their story, and not about your journey and not about your story. So I hope the people that are watching us today on Facebook, there's something that you can take away from that. Remember, wherever your little assertive number is, when you're feeling either good or bad, check back on your assertive number to see where you are and to see whether you kind of have felt better, or can you sort of like up your game a little bit, or did you do all right? And today I think we did all right, ladies. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Start.